Hey, brothers and sisters. In light of everything going on in the Middle East with Israel and Hamas and Hezbollah, I wanted to bring a resource to your attention and read a few excerpts from this book that I read. It had to be almost 15 years ago. It's entitled Judgment Day, Islam, Israel, and the Nations by Dave Hunt. On the back of the book it reads, "Is a global military assault on Israel simply an ominous, wild-eyed prophecy or an imminent worldwide reality? This is a grim prophecy, precise in its language. But why would God bring all nations against Jerusalem and Israel in order to punish them? God gives two very clear reasons. They have scattered my people the Jews among the nations and parted my land." Joel 3 verse 2. Israel has been conquered by many nations in the past, but never did a conqueror divide the land. That has only recently occurred in the first time in world history. All nations have united to do so and will be punished by God. The stage is set today. The drama will affect the whole world, and you're holding the script in your hands. And he's referring to the Bible. I skimmed through a couple of the chapters because I thought what Dave said way back almost 15 years ago is extremely relevant to the situation that we are seeing with Israel and the surrounding nations now. So under the heading Palestine, I thought it'd be fitting to kind of give a history lesson because so much news is focused on that little area called Palestine. So Dave goes on to say, quote, "We have already seen that the land into which God brought Abraham some 4,000 years ago, which he promised by everlasting covenant to him and to his heirs, in which he and his descendants through Isaac and Jacob lived for centuries thereafter, was not a non-existent place called Palestine, as those who erroneously call themselves Palestinians today insist. It was the historic land of Canaan." Quote, "And I will give unto thee and to thy seed after thee all the land of Canaan for an everlasting possession, and I will be their God. Be mindful always of his covenant, which he made with Abraham, and of his oath unto Isaac, and hath confirmed the same to Jacob for a law, and to Israel for an everlasting covenant, saying, Unto thee will I give the land of Canaan." Now the ancient land of Canaan and its inhabitants are unmistakably identified both in the Bible and by archaeology. Canaan was never promised to the Arabs, nor did they ever live in any numbers until modern times. Canaan's early inhabitants were the Canaanites, Kezanites, Hittites, Perizzites, etc., not the Palestinians. When the Israelites returned about 400 years as slaves in Egypt, marking them the promised heirs, they executed God's judgment upon an incredibly wicked people in conquering Canaan at God's command. "For the wickedness of these nations, the Lord thy God doth drive them out before thee. Not for thy righteousness, Canaan became Israel and was so known for more than 1,500 years. But most of the world, even most Israelis, call that land Palestine today. That has been its designation for centuries. If this was the land of Israel, when and how did it become known as Palestine? Well, around AD 132, the Romans, who had decimated Jerusalem in AD 70, began to rebuild it for the Roman Emperor Hadrian as a pagan city, dedicated to him and to Jupiter. They started construction of a temple to Jupiter on the Temple Mount at the site of the ancient Jewish temples. At first the revolt was remarkably successful, but more legions were brought in, and the Romans eventually destroyed nearly 1,000 villages, killed about 500,000 Jews, and sold thousands into slavery. When the revolt was finally crushed in AD 135, the Roman conquerors angrily renamed the land of Israel Provincia Syria Palestina, after Israel's ancient enemies, the Philistines. From that time forward, all those living there were known as the Palestinians. Dave does that little history lesson on regarding where did Palestine come from. Let me flip forward to the chapter in his book entitled Appeasement in Our Day. And this is where we see all the different efforts of peace in the Middle East. Dave goes on to say, democratic world powers seem at their wits' end in the futile effort to bring real peace in the Middle East. As we have documented beyond question, a major reason for failed peace efforts is the refusal of Western leaders to admit the truth, that the heart of the problem is Islam itself and what Muslim leaders are doing in the name of Allah to foment unrest and hatred of Israel and the West. Time and again, Israel is pressured to live at peace with and to give back yet more land to the Palestinians. But appeasement works no better now than it ever has. There is no appeasing or appealing to a mass murderer once he has the upper hand. Until we are willing to admit the truth and to state clearly to ourselves and to the world, including the Muslim world, that terrorism will not be rewarded with further concessions, the slide down the slippery slope of destruction will only gather momentum. And I think even as we have seen since this book was written, we have seen more and more attacks on Israel over and over again, and there has been no real peace. We know that the Antichrist will bring in a false peace, but that he will break that covenant with Israel. Under Dave's heading, Peace is Not Allowed, he writes, after losing the 1967 Six-Day War, a war that had been intended to annihilate Israel, Arab heads of state met in Sudan, August 29th through September 1st, 1967. Under Nasser's leadership, they adopted the infamous 3 no's: no peace with Israel, no negotiations with Israel, and no recognition of Israel. These express the very heart of Islam and have never been rescinded, making even the pretense of negotiation towards peace with Israel a complete fraud. As the peace process continues, Palestinians murder and torch the homes of fellow Arabs suspected of cooperating with Israel. Again, we hear echoes from the past. The same thing was being done in the 1920s, 30s, and 40s to any Arabs who did not join al-Husseini in his riots against the Jews, and who favored peaceful coexistence. In fact, at that time, more Arabs were being killed by terrorist followers than either Jews or British soldiers. Now, as Muslim terrorists who killed Jews are honored with streets and holidays named after them, this is the glorious foundation for peaceful coexistence. Speaking for God, the prophet Ezekiel condemns the leaders of Israel who have seduced my people, saying, peace, and there was no peace, which prophesy concerning Jerusalem, visions of peace for her, and there is no peace. Ezekiel's rebuke, so appropriate at the time, is also a prophecy that surely describes Israel and her leaders today. Now, the reason I decided to read some excerpts from this book is because Dave does a really good job painting a larger picture of what's going on ideologically within the Middle East. So many people want to say it's just politics, but it's really a religious war. When we see nations that are ideologically different, like Saudi Arabia, trying to normalize relations with Israel, we have to think in the back of our mind, now why would a Muslim nation want to make peace with Israel when their very worldview suggests that they don't even have a right to exist? I think there are a lot of plots, murderous plots, that are going on behind closed doors with these other nations and why they would want to join up with Israel. I think it's a very selfish motivation. I think Saudi Arabia looks to Israel as an economic world power. They want to profit economically, but in the back of their mind, they always want to come against Israel. And that's the same with Hamas, Hezbollah, Iran, and as we'll see in the future, the Gog-Magog alliance. When these nations come against Israel to attack Israel, All of this is prophetic, but I think we need to take a step back and understand prophetically and biblically what is going on in the Middle East, why there will never be a true peace until the Prince of Peace comes and essentially destroys the opposition. I will include a link for you if you would like to order Dave's book, Judgment Day. I highly suggest it in giving you a bird's eye view of what's going on in the Middle East. I pray this is a blessing to you. And again, as always, pray for Israel and Maranatha.
Jerusalem would not be the UN's #1 problem if Israel could be pushed around. But her military is the best in the world.
In that day will I make the governors of Judah a torch of fire, and they shall devour all the people round about. The Lord shall defend the inhabitants of Jerusalem.
Exactly as foretold, Israel has devoured her attackers, winning every war against overwhelming odds.
It was immediately invaded by 6 Arab nations. These armies outnumbered the Jewish settlers many times over and had overwhelming superiority in weapons, tanks, and planes. Given an indefensible narrow strip of land by the UN and attacked by enemies determined to exterminate her, Israel should have been annihilated. But to the astonishment of a watching world that was cheering for the other side, the Israeli settlers soundly defeated their would-be destroyers, exactly as God had promised. And so it has been, in war after war, as her enemies have repeatedly attacked to annihilate Israel. Yes, annihilation is their determined purpose. Muslims have a religious duty to exterminate the Jews. They dream of destroying Israel and hold celebrations to honor murderers of innocent Israeli citizens. Islamic fundamentalism is now sweeping the world. Muhammad himself declared,
The last hour will not come before the Muslims fight the Jews and the Muslims kill them.
Yet the media calls Muslim terrorists radicals and extremists. In fact, they are simply being true to Islam. The Quran declares,
Take not the Jews and Christians as friends. Slay the idolaters wherever you find them. Besiege them, and prepare for them each ambush.
Hitlerian threats pour continuously from Muslim religious and political leaders on TV and over radios and loudspeakers, in mosque and street. When Gaddafi screams, the battle with Israel will be such that Israel will cease to exist, he speaks for all. The extermination of Israel is bred into Muslims in their mother's milk. A Syrian minister of education wrote,
The hatred which we indoctrinate into the minds of our children from birth is sacred. A 9th grade textbook in Egypt declares, Israel shall not live if the Arabs stand first in their hatred. And a 5th grade textbook says, the Arabs do not cease to act for the extermination of Israel.